The silver locket caught the dying sunlight like a knife blade, and Samuel Hayes felt his world tilt sideways. The girl couldn't be more than 16, all sharp angles and hollow cheeks, crouched beside his water trough like a wounded animal. Her dress hung in tatters, stained with trail dust and something darker. But it was the delicate chain around her throat that made his breath catch, the intricate rose engraving he'd traced with his thumb 1,000 times before. Margaret's locket. His wife had worn it every day for 12 years, until the fever took her 3 winters past. He'd buried it with her, placed it gentle against her still chest, with hands that shook like autumn leaves. The preacher's words had meant nothing that day, only the cold weight of earth falling on the woman who'd made his empty ranch a home. Now, here it was, gleaming against this stranger's sun-darkened skin. The girl's eyes found his across the yard, wide and startled as a deer's. She scrambled backward, water dripping from her cupped palms, but her legs betrayed her. Hunger had carved her down to nothing but will and bone. Samuel's hand moved instinctively to his Colt, then stopped. The girl wasn't armed, wasn't dangerous in any way that mattered, but that locket. Christ, how did she come by it? Easy, he said, his voice rougher than he intended. The word hung between them like smoke. She tried to run then, pushing herself up on trembling arms, but collapsed against the wooden trough with a sound that cut through him. When she looked up, tears had carved clean tracks through the grime on her face. "Please," she whispered, "I ain't got nowhere else." The locket shifted against her throat as she spoke, catching light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the setting sun. Margaret's locket, impossibly here, impossibly real. Samuel felt something crack open inside his chest, something he'd kept sealed tight since the day he'd shoveled dirt over everything that mattered. The girl was dying slow, that much was plain, but the questions burning in his throat felt more urgent than mercy. He took a step closer, and she flinched like he'd raised a hand to strike. "Where'd you get that necklace, girl?" The girl's fingers flew to her throat, covering the locket like it might disappear if she looked away. "It was my mama's," she said, but her eyes couldn't hold his. "Been in our family." Samuel studied her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she clutched that chain like a lifeline. A lie, then, but why? And how in God's name had she come by something he'd seen lowered into the ground with his own eyes? The smart thing would be to turn her out. Send her on her way with a meal, and forget what he'd seen. The ranch had been quiet these 3 years, the way he preferred it. No complications, no reminders of what he'd lost, just the cattle and the endless sky and the blessed emptiness where his heart used to be. But Margaret's voice whispered in his memory, soft as summer rain. "Every soul deserves shelter from the storm, Samuel, even the lost ones. You're near dead on your feet," he said finally. "Come inside." The girl shook her head, pressing herself against the trough. "I can work. I ain't looking for charity." "Didn't say you were." Something in his tone made her look up sharp. In the fading light, her eyes held flecks of green that reminded him of spring grass after the snows melted. Young eyes, but old with trouble. "You fixing to turn me in?" "For what?" She didn't answer, but her hand tightened on the locket. Whatever she was running from had teeth. He could see it in the way she held herself, coiled tight as a rattler. Samuel pulled off his hat, ran fingers through graying hair. The right thing was clear enough. Feed her, send her on, but that locket cheese. Anged everything, turned simple charity into something thornier. "What's your name, girl?" "Rose." The word came out like a prayer. Rose. Christ, of course it was. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming rain and something else. Wood smoke from the direction of town. Too much smoke for cooking fires. Samuel's eyes found the horizon, where an orange glow painted the sky wrong. "That you're doing?" he asked, nodding toward the distant light. Rose followed his gaze, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. Fear and guilt warred across her features before she locked them away again. "I don't know what you mean," but she did, and now Samuel had to decide if mercy was worth the price it might demand. The riders came with the dawn, 6 hard men trailing dust and purpose. Samuel watched them from his kitchen window, coffee growing cold in his hands. Rose sat at his table, working through her second plate of eggs like she might never see food again. The locket caught morning light as she bent over her meal, and he found himself staring, despite his better judgment. "Company coming," he said quiet. Rose's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She looked up with those old young eyes, and he saw her calculating distances to the door, to the window, to anywhere but here. They're looking for you. It wasn't a question. The way she'd collapsed last night, the smoke on the horizon, the desperation in her bones. It all painted a picture he didn't much care for. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. The fire, I mean. I was just trying to get away and the lamp fell and... Hush. Samuel set down his cup, moved to the rifle rack by the door. How many dead? None, I think. I hope. The riders were closer now, close enough that he could make out the star on the leader's vest. Sheriff Morton, red-faced and breathing hard like he'd been riding all night. 2 deputies flanked him, and 3 men Samuel didn't recognize. Townspeople, maybe, or worse. They got dogs, he asked. Rose nodded miserably. Lost them at the creek, but they'll pick up the scent again. Samuel pulled the Winchester from its pegs, checked the load. 15 rounds. Against 6 men, it might be enough if he was smart about it, if he was lucky. Why? He asked, not looking at her. Why help you? Rose touched the locket, and for an instant she looked like someone else. Someone with Margaret's gentle hands and careful way of moving through the world. Because you got kind eyes, she said simply, like hers. The words hit him like a physical blow. Hers. As if Rose knew exactly whose locket she wore, whose memory she carried against her heart. Outside, Sheriff Morton called his name. Samuel Hayes, we know you're in there. Send out the girl, and nobody needs to get hurt. Samuel moved to the window, rifle in hand. The lawmen had spread out, surrounding the house neat as you please, professional, which meant they weren't planning to take chances. She burned down half of Millbrook, Morton shouted. 3 families got nothing left but ash. Rose made a sound like a wounded animal. I was just trying to get away from him, from what he wanted to do. Who? The banker, Mr. Crenshaw. He said I could work off Mama's debt in other ways. Samuel's jaw tightened. He knew Crenshaw, a soft man with hard appetites and enough money to buy whatever he wanted, including silence. So you ran. So I fought, and when he wouldn't stop, She swallowed hard. The lamp was right there. Through the window, Samuel could see Morton checking his pocket watch. Patient men, but not infinitely so. Soon they'd lose interest in talking. The locket gleamed against Rose's throat like an accusation, like a promise, like everything he'd buried and lost. Can you shoot? He asked. The first shot came at noon, splintering wood inches from Samuel's head. He'd sent Rose to the root cellar with his old Colt, and instructions to shoot anything that came through the door that wasn't him. The girl had steady hands despite everything, steadier than his own, if he was honest. Last chance, Hayes, Morton's voice carried across the yard, tight with frustration. You're harboring a criminal. Samuel worked the Winchester's lever, sent a round into the dirt at the sheriff's feet. She's just a girl who burned down 3 buildings, running from a man who'd have done worse. The silence stretched long enough for Samuel to shift position. Moving from the kitchen window to the parlor, through the lace curtains Margaret had made, he could see 2 deputies circling toward the back of the house. A crash from the rear sent his heart hammering. Glass breaking, heavy boots on his kitchen floor. He spun, brought the rifle up just as the first deputy rounded the corner. The man was young, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and a badge that still caught light like it was new. His gun wavered as he took in Samuel's position, the rifle trained on his chest. Don't, Samuel said quiet. Please don't make me. But the deputy's finger was already tightening on the trigger when Rose appeared behind him like a ghost. The Colt's barrel kissed the base of his skull, and the young man went very still. Drop it, she whispered. The deputy's gun hit the floor with a metallic clatter. Rose kicked it away, her eyes never leaving Samuel's face. In the soft parlor light, she looked impossibly young and impossibly dangerous. The others? Samuel asked. Coming fast. More glass breaking, shouts from the front yard. They were rushing the house now, patience spent. Samuel heard Morton bellowing orders, boots pounding across his porch. The cellar, he said. Go, Rose shook your head. Not without you. Girl, I'm trying to save your life. And I'm trying to save yours. The front door exploded inward, and Morton filled the frame like judgment itself. Behind him came the other men, guns drawn and faces hard with righteous anger. Enough, the sheriff roared. Stand down, both of you. Samuel kept the Winchester trained on the deputy, felt Rose's presence steady at his back. Through the broken doorway, he could see the townspeople, farmers and shopkeepers who'd known him for 15 years, who'd bought his cattle and shared his table. "She's wearing my dead wife's jewelry," he said into the sudden quiet. "Explain that to me, Sheriff. Explain how a girl running from Crenshaw's appetites comes to have something I buried 3 years past." Morton's face went pale. Behind him, one of the townsmen, Jim Crawford from the Mercantile, stepped forward with recognition dawning in his eyes. "That's Margaret's locket," Crawford breathed. "I seen her wear it to church every Sunday." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. "Check the grave." Sheriff Morton's words fell into the room like stones into still water. Samuel felt something cold settle in his chest, a weight he'd been carrying without knowing. "What?" "I said check the grave, Hayes. Been meaning to for weeks now. Folks have been talking." Morton's gun never wavered, but his voice carried something that might have been pity. "About sounds at night. About the cemetery keeper finding disturbed earth." Rose's hand found Samuel's shoulder, and he felt her trembling through the thin cotton of her dress. The locket at her throat caught lamplight like tears. "They dug her up," she whispered. 3 weeks passed. Took everything she was buried with. The locket, her wedding ring, even the dress you picked out special. Samuel's world tilted. "Who?" "Crenshaw's men. Said Mama owed money, and the dead got no use for gold." Rose's voice broke on the words. "Mama tried to stop them, tried to fight, but she was already so sick." The rifle felt heavy in Samuel's hands, suddenly meaningless. "Your mother?" "Sarah McKinney. She cleaned your house sometimes, after Margaret passed. Said you were the only man in town who still treated her decent. Sarah, sweet Christ, he remembered her. A thin woman with gentle hands who'd made his empty rooms feel less like a tomb. She'd never taken charity, always insisted on earning every penny. And when the cough started, she'd still come, working until she could barely stand. She died holding that locket," Rose continued, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "Said it reminded her of someone who knew how to love proper." Morton lowered his gun, understanding dawning in his weathered features. The townsmen behind him shifted uncomfortably, shame and anger warring in their expressions. "Crenshaw," one of them spat. "That bastard's been bleeding the whole town dry." "Where is he now?" Samuel asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Lit out this morning," Morton replied. "Soon as he heard about the fire. Took everything he could carry." Samuel set the Winchester aside, moved to where Rose stood trembling by the wall. Up close, he could see Margaret's locket clearly, the tiny dent on one side where she'd dropped it years ago, the worn spots where her fingers had worried the chain. "Your mama give this to you?" Rose nodded. "Said it belonged to someone who understood that love don't die just 'cause breathing stops." The words hit him like a blow. He reached out, touched the locket with fingers that shook like leaves in a storm. It was warm from Rose's skin. Warm like it had been when Margaret wore it. She was right, he said finally. Outside, the wind was picking up, carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. Samuel looked at Rose, really looked at her, and saw Margaret's kindness reflected in those young old eyes, saw the strength it had taken to survive what she'd survived. "You got anywhere to go?" he asked. Rose shook her head. Samuel glanced at Morton, at the townsmen crowding his doorway. Good men, most of them, who would let shame and fear drive them to this moment. But they were backing away now, understanding that whatever justice was owed here, it wasn't theirs to collect. "Then you'll stay," Samuel said simply. "Help me work the ranch. Earn your keep honest." Rose's hand flew to the locket, clutched it tight. "I can't take this. It ain't mine." Margaret would have wanted you to have it, would have wanted someone to carry it who understood what it meant. The late afternoon light slanted through his broken windows, painting everything golden and soft. In that light, Rose looked like hope made flesh, young and damaged and achingly alive. "She'd have liked you," Samuel said, and meant it. Rose smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and for just a moment the empty spaces in his heart felt less like wounds and more like rooms waiting to be filled. The wind carried away the last of the smoke, and somewhere in the distance, thunder promised rain.